Hello everyone, this is Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm here to review Flower. And I went into this film knowing that it's getting some mixed reviews, but it has a really high audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes. I didn't actually know the plot or anything. I saw this tiny synopsis about this young woman, like crazy young woman, making the connection with her stepbrother, and I didn't know much else. And then this movie started. I'm like, holy crap, I did not expect this movie. And this film is about a young woman who's played by Zoe Deutsch, who I'll gush about in a little bit, who is super manic, quirky, foul-mouthed, and pardon my language, but she gives blowjobs and entraps guys and blackmails them for money. And I'm just like, oh, this is where this movie's going. And the film is centered around her and this budding relationship that she has with her emotionally distressed, rehabbed stepbrother. And boy, is this an interesting coming of age story. And with so much more stuff thrown into this, and there's so many interesting things about this film, but does it all work? And this was hard for me to come to grips what I really thought about this film. And I saw this last night, and I started using Stardust again, so if you want to go check out my Stardust thoughts, which I had trouble thinking about what to say sitting after the movie. And this film is written and directed by Max Winkler, but also written by Matt Spicer, who did Ingrid Goes West. I didn't notice that until after the movie, and I'm like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. And it does have that feel. This is very blunt in your face, kind of new age kind of film that very much feels like of this time and this mindset of our culture and society. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about it. And I think that's a big thing for it. And it's interesting in that way. It goes places, though, and I wasn't fully expecting the places this film goes. And some of them work, some of them really did not. And I think I was never bored during this film. This really moves along, and honestly, it's a lot more carefully put together than a lot of coming-of-age stories, and I was talking about this with Love, Simon, but I appreciate how Max Winkler put this film together, and then also how Carolina Costa, who does the cinematography for this film, shoots this film. And you could tell there's a couple of different kinds of camera work. There's some steady cam, there's some hand cam, and there's also some filtering on some of the shots that was interesting, and I think it worked really well for this film and made it feel a little bit different. This film felt, there was a couple of scenes that felt like something like Thoroughbreds, which I reviewed a couple weeks ago, where it feels a bit Kubrickian and how things are shot. There's one particular scene I'm like, it felt a different style, but much more inspired kind of cinematography than some of the other parts in the film. I'm like, would have been interesting to see that, but the thing is, after a while, it's like, and I appreciate that kind of cinematography, it's just like, everybody is doing the same thing, and pulling from the same thing, and that's the interesting thing about film, is when students of film start making films, and they all have the same auteurs that they look at and bring them into their films. But this movie is very hit or miss, and I don't know how it all adds up. That's the tricky thing about this film. And there's some twists that go on in this film, and how some of these characters are set up, I don't know how to believe them, honestly, after a while. And there's one particular, the stepbrother in this film, I had trouble believing him in the third act of the film, like what he's saying and stuff, because how his character's built up to that point, where there's some certain plot points where like I can't tell if like this is like a reveal or a red herring, like a in film red herring from one character to another, or like a lie. And apparently by the end I'm realizing like, okay, that was supposed to be like actual things, but I didn't believe it for a second. And those were some issues with the storytelling, and this, I feel like this kind of jumps the shark a bit to where this film goes, but I had such an interesting ride getting there. And I feel like that's the most I could take out of this film. Is it was super interesting. It had such a dark humor and uncomfortable humor at points, but still hit and like dug really deep. Because the thing is, this film deals with a lot of things that are unsettling and uncomfortable to listen to or to watch or to process, honestly. And the music wasn't super memorable, but it does its job. So Joseph Stevens, who does the score, it did its job. I think what this film really stands out with is how committed the performances are, and Zoe Deutsch is amazing in this film. She's just like spewing charisma, and she has interesting chemistry with a lot of different characters, and she is written off as like a crazy over the top stereotype, but Zoe Deutsch is so committed to it that she feels super interesting. Catherine Hahn as her mom, they have a really weird, interesting relationship, and Catherine Hahn has to go to some places that I usually don't get to see her do. Adam Scott pops up in this, and he has an interesting place in the story, and I think he does a good job. Tim Heidecker plays her stepdad, who's supposed to be like super nerd and super dork, and I think he does a really good job. He's one of the standouts. And then Joey Morgan does a really nice job as her stepbrother. But this is Zoe Deutsch's film, and she really steals it. My big complaint is like her two friends seem like mild and super mild versions of her kind of thing, and don't really have anything else to stand on themselves, and they kind of like disappear from the film, honestly. And it's just like, okay, this film is crazy and unpredictable, and it might not always work, but Zoe Deutsch is fantastic, and it was definitely an interesting ride getting there. And I'm going to give Flower a C+.